Hi, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Hey, Craig.
Craig.
Hello, and welcome back to the Paddocks, everyone. And get ready to sit through a long one because today we're covering a legend, Fernando Alonso. Today we have myself, Drea, Casey, Amy, Ito, and LeAnne on the episode, and we are so excited to dive in. On the F1 circuit for over 18 seasons, this episode is going to focus on the beginning of Fernando in karts, through his brief retirement in endurance racing and Le Mans, and how he found his way back onto the grid once again as one of this year's top drivers. Let's start from the beginning with Casey.
Fernando Alonso was born on July 29th, 1981, in Oviedo, Spain, in the region of Asturias. His father was a mineshaft explosive factory mechanic, and his mother was a department store employee, so he came from very humble beginnings. He also has an older sister who is an accomplished doctor. To help foster the love of motorsport with his kids and to kind of be able to share a hobby with them, Alonso's father built his older sister, Lorena, a go-kart for her birthday. But she had no interest in it and didn't really want it, so he was like, okay, I guess I'll give it to Fernando, who at the time was 3. And that's kind of where his motorsport career began, almost entirely on accident. And since the kart was built for an older and a taller Lorena, the pedals had to be modified so that he could reach them and so that he could actually drive the kart. He started locally in his region of Asturias, and at that time, back in the 80s, a lot of the circuits were on city streets and the barriers were made of hay bales, which is something you don't really see nowadays with the current safety measures, but I guess it was a little wilder back then. He had a natural talent for driving, but racing can be a very expensive sport, and it is a very expensive sport still to this day. And so, given that his family had modest finances, they couldn't quite cover the costs. So his father kind of had to act as every role you can think of, from an accountant, counselor, manager, mechanic, pretty much everything when he first started out. And to help save money, his mom would help make his race suits and would even kind of adjust them and tailor them as he grew so they wouldn't have to buy new ones. And they also couldn't afford rain tires. So whenever it rained, he had to use his slick tires, which actually became a pretty useful skill in F1, where having to race in the rain on slicks is not the easiest thing in the world. But his parents still made sure that even while he was racing, he still received a good education and that he was a good student, even with having to kind of balance the school and racing, which I think definitely comes into play today because it seems like he can just recite the rule book of the FIA during the race while he's driving, which is insane. At age 7, in his first full karting season, he actually won the championship of his region in 1988, and then won again the following year in 1989. And then he continued to win and do well and won the 1990 Asturias and Basque County Cadet Championship, and then got second in the 1991 Spanish Cadet National Championship. Now, he had accumulated quite a few wins by this point, and at 12, his performance caught the eye of the go-kart importer Dennis Marco, who would actually continue to help mentor Fernando throughout his early career and everything, and was able to help find personal and sponsorship money to help ease Fernando's family's financial burden and kind of help fund his racing career. Marco also brought in 6-time karting world champion Mike Wilson to help mentor Fernando and would even help give him a test section at the track in Parma, Italy. And a fun fact when I was looking into all of this is that Mike Wilson would actually go on to later tutor Lance Stroll, Fernando's future teammate, and actually compared the two and their determination to win. So I thought that was kind of interesting, a similar start. Then Alonso would join the Italian-American Motor Engineering Works team in 1993 and would win 3 consecutive Spanish Junior National Championships from 93 to 95, allowing him to advance to the World Championships. While he was karting, Fernando would also work as a mechanic for the younger kart drivers to earn some extra money. And this is actually how he met his friend and business partner Alberto Fernandez, who kind of is like his manager, but also works with him on kind of his brand and helps him out with racing and everything. So they're pretty close friends and met by Fernando being his mechanic. And after winning a few more karting titles, Fernando made the jump to car racing at 17 with Campus Motorsport in the 1999 Euro Open by Nissan, Formula Nissan. It was another name for that. He won in the final race of the season with 6 wins and 9 poles. And this is also the year in which he met his future manager, Flavio Briatore, the infamous figure himself, who would help get him his first F1 seat with Minardi. He progressed to the International Formula 3000 Championship with the Minardi-backed team Astromega, finishing 4th overall. This experience with Minardi helped him get his first F1 seat with the team in 2001. So due to his experience with Minardi, he was able to get his first experience in an F1 car in 1999 with the Minardi F1 team as a part of Formula Nissan's agreement to have their champion test at a higher level. And he would continue to work with Minardi in 2000 as their reserve driver for the F1 team before joining the team as a full-time driver in 2001. The car wasn't the greatest, so Fernando only finished the season 23rd with 0 points at the time, which is crazy to think of where he is now. But at the time, Formula One wasn't very big in Spain, and they didn't even have the broadcast on TV. So his parents had to actually get a satellite dish to watch the German feed of the race to be able to watch their son race. And so Fernando actually kind of helped bring the sport of Formula One to the country of Spain, which is pretty cool. And because now he and his fellow countryman Carlos Sainz are both, prominent sports figures in Spain, and Formula One is huge, especially with the Barcelona race that just happened. The crowds were insane. So F1 is definitely massive in Spain now. And now Chelsea will talk about his next Formula One experience with Renault.
So Alonso and Renault's F1 relationship began in 2002 when Alonso became a test driver thanks to his new manager Flavio Briatore. At the time, Jenson Button and Jarno Trulli were holding first and second seat that season, but Alonso was able to impress the team with his skills at different circuits, enough to find himself a seat in the 2003 season, replacing Jenson Button. Now, the 2003 season with Renault was exactly the kind of reputation we know Alonso for now. He was gaining podium wins in second and third position and was already becoming adored by the Spanish fans like we saw this past weekend. He got his first place win in F1 at the Hungary Grand Prix that year after gaining pole position in the qualies, and he also got a pole position in Malaysia. Now, this made him the youngest driver ever at the time to achieve such a thing at the baby age of 22. To put into perspective, that's like Yuki winning his first race right now in a first place position. However, both those things have sadly changed since then, with Sebastian Vettel being the youngest pole position holder at 21 in 2008 at the Italian Grand Prix, and the youngest F1 race winner becoming Max Verstappen at 18 at the 2016 Spanish Grand Prix, which, funny enough, he just won this past weekend too. Now, Alonso ended that 2003 season in 6th position in the championship, which at the time was really impressive considering he had only been on the F1 circuit for a few seasons. Next was 2004, which was a slower year for Renault, with Ferrari taking place as a top team that year, but Alonso was still able to score points and a few podiums to hold 4th position in the championship that year, although his teammate was the only one to place a first place victory winner for Renault, and that was in Italy. Now, 2005 is where I need you all to hold on to your seats, because Alonso is about to kick Ferrari out of their first place championship spot, aka Michael Schumacher, who had won the past 5 championships. In 2005, F1 introduced new regulations to the circuit. Now, I had to do some research on this, so here's what I was able to understand. One regulation reduced the downforce by 30% to slow the car speed down, and they did this by raising the front nose 10 centimeters. The rear wing has been forward. I don't know what this means. This is what the research came up with. And the rear diffuser is smaller. Now, most teams were actually able to gain back that speed loss by just putting their wind tunnels on maximum power from what I was able to find on Eurosport. And another different regulation was they also had to use the same tires on quali and race day. Again, they were trying to lower their speed. But the last thing I want to mention was the new engine rule change. And this is where Renault might have found that 2005 championship power. Aside from Fernando Alonso driving for them. So basically, F1 placed a regulation that you could only use one engine per 2 races. Now, this raised the cost in engine manufacturing because they had to find something that could handle the need that would last that long, But while most teams didn't end up seeing a big difference, Renault was suddenly on this power surge. And this year was freaking chaotic. So this man gained 6 pole positions, 14 podiums, and 6 first place wins, bringing him to win, you guessed it, the Formula One World Championship for Renault. Now, this championship also made Alonso Fernando the youngest Formula One world champion at the time, taking out Emerson Fittipaldi, who had recently held the youngest winner title. Alonso ended that season missing points in only 2 races. Now, the thing is, and I think we can all agree on this, especially with how the season's currently happening, Alonso knows what to do on the track as a strategist. He knows when to attack, when to push, defend, and this year with Renault really showed that early on in his career. Alonso would prove this ability in 2006 as he held the championship title again over Ferrari's Michael Schumacher, who would go on to retire that same year. Now, because of Ferrari's reliability issues, which sounds familiar, Renault was able to gain pace in multiple races where Ferrari couldn't, even with the tire regulation from 2005, which had trumped Ferrari the season before, being reversed. Now, that year, both Alonso and Michael were able to gain 7 wins each, which I feel like must have made the season way more interesting to watch and follow because they were literally tied at that point with first place wins. So, the Renault car was also thankfully faster than Kimi's because he was a McLaren and it was zooming, which was another team that was a top contender at the time for the championship and had been one of Alonso's biggest rivals on the track beside Michael. Now, McLaren's speed wasn't lost on Alonso, or his manager, so we see him leave Renault to join McLaren for the 2007 season with a 3-year contract in place.
And what a memorable year Alonso had here at McLaren. Yes, folks, that's right, you heard correctly. Alonso was only at McLaren for the 2007 season instead of through to 2009. So let's get into the brief overview of what happened there. McLaren signed not only Alonso on the 2007 season, but also a rookie who some of you might know. Lewis Hamilton, ring a bell, anyone? If y'all thought Max was a menace in his flat cap Max era or Seb in his Red Bull era, Alonso walked so they could run. He still might be the baddest of them all. So let's jump into Alonso's reputation era. Coming off of back-to-back Drivers' World Championships at Renault, Alonso moved to McLaren expecting to be number 1 driver if team orders or team strategy called for one driver to be prioritized over the other. At the season opening race in Australia, there was tension between the teammates from the first corner. Lewis, who was started 4th, overtook Alonso, who was 2nd, on the outside of the first corner, and thus the rivalry was born. Alonso finished 2nd in the race and went on to win in Malaysia, the 2nd Grand Prix of the season that year. Some sketchy things went down at the start of the 3rd Grand Prix of that season, but we'll cover it in the future. For now, let's just focus on Fernando's racing career. He finished 5th at Bahrain, 3rd at his home race in Spain, 1st at Monaco, making him a title contender again, and 7th in Canada. Let's slow down a second for Canada, though. Fernando was 2nd in quali, and you can probably guess who the pole sitter was. If you said Lewis, then you're correct. So when it came time to race and Alonso tried to overtake Lewis early on, he ran wide and it was downhill from there for Fernando. Back then, drivers could not pit under a safety car, so he picked up a 10-second stop-and-go penalty for that, resulting in him finishing 7th. We're going to skip a few races down to Hungary. Sparks flew at qualifying, where Hamilton ignored team radio to give Alonso track position in Q3. For those of you who are not sure how quali works, Q3 is when the top 10 cars are racing for fastest lap and the starting grid position for the race on Sunday. Here's where Fernando woke up and chose violence. Since Hamilton did not give him track position, he stayed in the pit box, preventing Lewis from finishing a final flying lap, but ensuring that Alonso got pole. Even though it worked in his favor at the moment, the people we all know and love stepped in. Yep, the FIA. We love them. Alonso was handed a 5-place grid penalty for his petty move. Again, Spygate will be covered more in depth in the future. By the 14th race of the season, Fernando was not on speaking terms with most of the team and targeted Lewis at Spa. He literally said skirt, skirt, and skirted across the whole grid to get at Alonso. That was his targeting him. It was locked on. So the Japanese Grand Prix had Fernando running into another great, Seb Vettel, before crashing out. Even though Fernando podiumed the last 2 races of the season, it was not enough to get the championship for a 3rd time in a row. Kimi Räikkönen was the 2007 WDC with 110 points. The McLaren drivers, who we, all know and love, they were tied for 109 points, but because Lewis had more race wins, he was crowned 2nd place in the World Drivers' Championship and Alonso 3rd, breaking his back-to-back championship streak. That's how Alonso's origin villain story goes for now.
After a messy year with McLaren, like Drea mentioned earlier, and cutting all ties with the team, we see Alonso make his way back to Renault for the 2008 season. The problem is, this wasn't the same team he had left, at least not really. The regulations were once again changed, and suddenly, the Renault winning team of 2005 and 2006 was replaced with a version of the team that could barely keep up in the races to get points, and with a car that Alonso said always felt off. After 7 races and only 9 points gained, Renault brought some aerodynamic changes that helped them in the second half of the season, but there was still no first place win. So Alonso was back to 5th in the Driver Championship for 2008, but this season would come back to them in 2009. Now, during the 2009 season, Alonso is having a rough year and so is Renault. I'll lightly touch on it today, but this is where some of you listeners might know about the crash gate, and this is where it comes into play. Basically, we have Nelson Piquet Jr. state that he was told to purposely crash at the Singapore 2008 Grand Prix, which led to Fernando Alonso winning the race, supposedly. No one cared about the race until Felipe Massa speculated and stated that this specific race caused him the 2008 championship, which he had just lost by 1 point to Lewis Hamilton in the McLaren. Now, the team principal for Renault, Flavio Briatore, would be banned from all Formula One events after the Crashgate investigation. Thankfully, our boy Alonso was cleared of having anything to do with the Singapore 2008 incident during the investigation. Now, as for Alonso on the grid in 2009, a lot to be wanted. He was in the points, but there was no first place wins, and there was only 1 podium win, which was Singapore. So that's fun. And after a disappointing return to Renault, Alonso was whisked away to Ferrari for another chance at the World Championship.
Yeah, and actually him being whisked away by Ferrari is very interesting, especially because of how it happened. Because originally he was supposed to drive for them in 2009 after the whole Crashgate thing happened. But then team principal Jean Todt vetoed the idea and continued with the 2008 lineup of Räikkönen and Massa. And Todd even actually wanted him to start in 2011 instead of 2010, but because of the mess that was Renault in 2009, and especially with the whole Crashgate saga, and Räikkönen being released from his contract early, he ended up starting for them in 2010. And honestly, you could have thought that he was back to his old form, truly bringing the fight to the Red Bulls of Vettel and Webber, as well as the McLaren of Hamilton and Button. While he was down 47 points during the summer break due to a series of mistakes early on, he managed to recover and was leading the championship by 8 points ahead of the last race. But even after winning a total of 9 races throughout the season, sadly, he ultimately lost out to Vettel, who won the last race of the season, where we actually got the now famous quote that said at the end of the race, when Vettel crossed the finish line, his race engineer came on the radio and said, "You just wait, sunshine, you just wait," because he basically had to wait to see where Alonso would finish in the pecking order in order to basically say, yes, I won the World Championship for definite. But anyway, 2011, it was a mixed bag, sadly. He was only able to win the British GP thanks to a mistake by Red Bull. And it would be his only win that season, even though he ended up on the podium 9 times and out-qualified his teammates almost 80% of the time, aka at 15 out of the 19 races. But Red Bull and Button in the McLaren were just too strong for him, causing him to finish 4th. 2012, he was strong, I would say, at least for part of the season, because he led the championship due to his 3 wins and high point finishes in general. But ultimately, Vettel once again came and ruined the Fernando Alonso hype party. And Ferrari, being Ferrari on top of that, got plagued by things like bad strategy, collisions, mechanical issues, etc. towards the end of the season. And that's why ultimately he ended up 2nd. And as Drea mentioned, he does have a villain aspect to his character, and that's why in 2013 we once again saw a very aggressive Alonso that was able to win a few races, but at the same time, it was the start of the end of his Ferrari stint, as he was under the impression that the team couldn't construct a winning car. And I mean, he wasn't necessarily wrong. I mean, they haven't won a championship since Kimi in 2006. Like, they still can't construct a winning car. Look at even this season, come on. But his contract ran on until the end of 2014, and because of all this disillusionment, he ultimately failed to extend his contract. And because even though 2013 was bad, 2014 was worse. Because he had no race win. His best result was 2nd in Hungary. And I'm going to have to quote Niki Lauda for this, because Ferrari just had a shitbox of a car that year, and which saw him ultimately finish in 6th in the standings, behind the likes of Mercedes, Red Bull, and even the Williams of Valtteri Bottas. And knowing Williams now, we know how much of a feat that is for Williams to get that far up in the order. His only saving grace really that season was that he outqualified his teammate at 16 out of the 19 races.
Now, 2015 saw Fernando Alonso coming back to McLaren after contract negotiations with Ferrari fell through. He rejoined McLaren on a 3-year contract that was set to span from 2015 to 2017 with no opt-out clauses. For people who may have heard the phrase opt-out clauses, think Daniel Ricciardo's contract with McLaren. There were no outs for Alonso with his 3-year contract with them. He did have an accident during preseason testing in Spain, which resulted in him sustaining a concussion. He was replaced by their reserve driver, who we all know and love, Mr. Kevin Magnussen himself, for the season opening Australian Grand Prix. He endured a really difficult season with the car. At this point in time, McLaren was using Honda engines, and it was underpowered, which was just leaving him vulnerable to being passed. He was able to score points twice in 2015, but they were only a 10th place in the British Grand Prix and a 5th place in Hungary for the 17th World Drivers' Championship, and he only left with 11 points, which for Fernando Alonso was just not up to his standards. He was very, very upset on his radios. You could very clearly hear radio messages of him complaining about the car and the slow pace. Those can actually be found on YouTube if you want to go give them a listen. Despite the unreliable and uncompetitive car that McLaren had produced in 2015, Alonso was back again for 2016 and yet again sustained some injuries after having a heavy crash with Esteban Gutierrez in the Australian Grand Prix, which was the season opener that year, which caused him to miss the Bahrain Grand Prix, which he was replaced by reserve driver Stoffel van Dorn. During his 2016 season with McLaren, Alonso qualified better than his teammate Jenson Button 15 times and scored 9 times, including 2 fifth-place finishes, being Monaco and the US Grand Prix, and he finished 10th in the Drivers' Championship with 54 points, which is getting better, but still not where he wants to be. 2017, again, we've got reliability issues and a car that's just not meeting his standards in the beginning of the season. His best finish in 2017 was 6th place at the Hungary Grand Prix. After 3 consecutive top 10 finishes, Alonso was able to finish 15th in the Drivers' Championship with 17 points, which just kind of goes to show you how low scoring of a season that was for certain people in terms of points. Alonso, after 2017, signed a multi-year contract to extend with McLaren. He finished 5th at the season opening of the Australian Grand Prix in 2018 and took 9 top 10 finishes. And again, Fernando Alonso being himself, he outqualified his teammate, who was former reserve driver Stoffel van Dorn, at every single race in the 2018 season. He, during that season, did become increasingly annoyed with certain drivers, and his commitment to F1 really kind of started to be a little under question, especially after McLaren stopped developing their car in 2018 to focus on the 2019 season. Alonso ended up finishing 11th in the Drivers' Championship with 50 points and left the sport as a driver at the end of 2018. Now, he has stated that his reason for leaving was due to the perceived lack of on-track racing and the predictability of results, and felt that discussions away from racing about the broadcast of radio transmissions were just polemic and harmed the series as a whole. He did stay on with McLaren to be a brand ambassador until the end of 2019, where he was brought on to aid and advise drivers and drive in selected tests to help with the development of the car.
So as Amy just mentioned, Fernando Alonso was kind of being a bit disillusioned with the sport of F1 towards the end with McLaren, and so he kind of looked elsewhere to find a challenging race. And one of those things was with IndyCar, and which is a part of what is called the Triple Crown of Motorsports, which consists of 3 races: the Monaco GP in F1, the 24 Hours of Le Mans in the World Endurance Championship, and the Indy 500 in IndyCar. Only Graham Hill has accomplished the feat of winning the Triple Crown, and since Fernando had already won the Monaco Grand Prix, he decided to take a crack at the Indy 500. Since the Indy 500 and the Monaco Grand Prix are the same weekend, Fernando had to choose which one he wanted to do. And since his racing in McLaren really was not going very well due to the car, he decided to skip the Monaco Grand Prix to compete in the Indy 500 while he was still in Formula One. So the Indy 500 consists of 200 laps for 500 miles around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. When he tried this American race for the first time, his former teammate, who had just recently retired, Jenson Button, actually filled in for him while he was in Monaco, and they were actually able to connect through the radio between the two, so Fernando was able to wish Jenson Button good luck from America in the race before he went out. But Alonso actually managed to start off well, and he led 27 laps of the 200 laps of the race, and it actually looks like he might have a shot at winning this, but the bad luck strikes again as his engine fails with only 21 laps to go. So, I mean, that really sums up his experience during those years with McLaren. But he continues to try again. So he tries again at the Indy 500 in 2018, now with McLaren's own IndyCar team, McLaren Racing. And the Indy 500 has a pretty unique qualifying format. On Saturday, the weekend before the race, every driver will get 4 laps to set the fastest average speed, which will set their initial position. After that initial chance, each car will have a chance to go again, but you have to pick which lane you would want to try again in. Lane 1 is the priority lane, where cars will get priority access to the track, but they have to drop their previous qualifying time, which means if you do worse with the second shot, then that's your time. You can't go back to the better time that you had before. Lane 2 is for cars that want to try again, but they want to keep their previous time. So that way, if they make a mistake and they get a worse time, they can still keep their better time and have a better qualifying position. And at the end of the day on Saturday, positions 13 through 30 will be finalized for the race. On Sunday, the top 12 will qualify again, with the top 6 going into another qualifying session called the Fast 6 Shootout. And this was what determines the pole and the top 6 of the race. Also on Sunday, any car in position 31 and below will compete in what is called the Last Row Shootout to grab the final 3 spots on the grid, as there are only 33 available grid spots for race day, but oftentimes more than 33 cars will enter into qualifying. So Fernando's Indy 500 experience in 2017 starts off pretty poorly, where the team forgot the steering wheel for the car during testing, so they had to scramble to just find the steering wheel. So I don't know how you forget a steering wheel. I feel like that's a pretty important part of a car, but they managed it. So luckily they were able to find one, and he was able to complete in testing, but already we're off to a chaotic start, and the qualifying doesn't get much better. So Fernando crashes in practice, and which means he needs to move to the spare car. And typically the spare car would be with them at the speedway. But because McLaren was McLaren, it had been painted the wrong shade of orange. So they had to take it away, ship it away to get repainted the correct shade of orange. And so it wasn't at the track when they needed it. So there was a huge delay in getting the car back to the track for him to continue to, race. So it gets even worse with the setup error converting from imperial to metric measuring system, which caused the floor to just completely scrape across the tarmac the entire time, and also combined with the incorrect gear ratios that they used. This caused Fernando to finish 31st in the initial kind of time trials, which means he has to go on to the last row shootout, which is obviously not where you want to be. But it's honestly amazing that they managed to get a time at all at this point with all of the chaos that's been going on. And in that last row shootout, Fernando barely misses out, where he is bumped to 34th place by Kyle Kaiser, nabbing that 33rd spot. It was completely shocking for everyone because, this is pretty, this is one of the smaller teams knocking out Fernando Alonso from the Indy 500, which was crazy. And so the whole process was kind of a bit of a mess. From forgetting the steering wheel to, not being the correct shade of orange. It really put the icing on the cake to Fernando's years with McLaren. And I highly recommend, there's a documentary series on Amazon. I think it's called Fernando. And there's 2 seasons, and they really go into depth with his IndyCar kind of experience, where they have footage of him, behind the scenes footage of all of this, so you can see it happen. And it also goes into more depth on all the times he tried with the Indy 500, and with his most recent attempt being in 2020 with what is now called Aero McLaren. He finally manages to cross the finish line in the Indy 500, as he had engine failure the first time and he didn't even make it to the race the second. But he only finished 21st. So will we see him return to the Indy 500 sometime in the future to try and complete the Triple Crown? And the documentary series I mentioned also goes into his time in retirement and what he did afterwards. And one of those things is the Dakar Rally. The Dakar Rally is a 10 to 15 day rally raid, which is a long distance off-road race with a total distance of several thousand kilometers. This is split up by day in what are called stages that are timed sections, with the classification from the previous stage being used to set the starting order for the next one. So they only go this section of kilometers at a time. There's a special marathon stage that is 2 days long, and during this section, the no support vehicles or personnel or any outside assistance is allowed at all, which means that all the work on the vehicles must be done by the competitors. So that means that not only do you need to know how to drive the car, you also have to learn how to fix the car. So if you need to change your wheel, fix your axle, anything that goes wrong, you have to figure out how to do it yourself. So that also goes into some of the training. In between these different stages, the teams will stay at a work camp called the Bivouac. Bivouac? Do not know how to pronounce that. I apologize. As the teams will race across the landscape, their support crew will also move with them, kind of like camps of sorts, because they're in the middle of nowhere. So they kind of set up makeshift cities where all of the people and competitors and teams are kind of located. And this race also will include navigations. So there will be a driver and a navigator in the car during the race, and the navigator will be given directions in the form of a road book that will be provided by the organizers right before each stage, so that way that the actual course will be kept secret until right when they start. It's up to the navigator to interpret the roadbook instructions and deliver that information to the driver quickly and so that they can make the fastest time. And now Amy will go into more about Alonso's experience with the Dakar now that I've talked about what it is.
Okay, so before I go into Fernando Alonso's experience with the Dakar Rally race, I do want to add a few little bits of information. So the Dakar Rally race was started in 1979 and ran from 1979 to 2007, being held between Europe and Africa. It was canceled in 2008 following security concerns. And then in 2009, they actually moved the race to South America. When Fernando Alonso entered the race, it was being held in Saudi Arabia for the very first time when he entered in 2020, where he was competing alongside fellow Spaniard Carlos Sainz Sr. and got to have a little bit of a battle with his fellow countrymen. It being done in Saudi Arabia for the first time, it was following a 5-month testing period in Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Alonso competed in a few different series prior to Dakar to prepare himself and be a little bit better in the race. He competed in the Lichtenberg 400 in South Africa, the Rally du Maroc in Morocco, and a different rally in Saudi Arabia. His co-driver and navigator was 5-time Dakar Rally Bike class winner Mark Coma. Coma had finished 13th position, with his best stage being second place when he was competing. During their experience, they did have to stop for repairs on the second stage as they experienced a double rollover, which lost them several hours in the general classifications because they had to sit there and do their own tire repair, which if you're not a mechanic is a little complicated. If you've never seen a rally car, I do recommend that you Google them. They're built very different from an Indy car or a Formula One car or even a regular road car. They have a higher suspension. Sadly, during his experience in the rally, safety concerns were heightened because there was a motorcyclist, Paulo Goncalves, who sadly passed away after he sustained injuries from a crash in the 7th stage of the rally. Now, if you haven't figured it out, Fernando Alonso is a driver who really needs competition. He thrives under competition. So he decided to get into endurance racing. And most Formula One drivers get into endurance racing after they have left F1. That is not the case for Fernando. He decided that he wanted to dip his toe into endurance racing while he was in F1, where he actually made his debut by competing in the 24 Hours of Barcelona in 1999, where he was paired with Antonio Garcia and Salvi Delmuns and a journalist named Pedro Flores. The quartet actually finished 3rd in the M10 class and 10th overall in a Hyundai Accent, which is actually a compact car that was released in Australia, which is pretty interesting. He was supposed to have entered in the 24 Hours of Le Mans with Porsche's Le Mans Prototype 1 in 2015, but that actually got blocked by Honda. So he wasn't able to get involved until a little bit later. He did also drive for Liger GS E217 when he entered in the 24 Hours of Daytona in preparation for Le Mans, because endurance racing is completely different from any type of racing. As the name suggests, you are driving for 24 hours. During his 24 Hours of Daytona, he was teamed with Philip Hansen, and at the time, he was also paired with McLaren's reserve driver, who is now a current driver for them, who everybody knows and loves in the PGP team, Lando Norris. Qualified 13th and finished 38th after multiple mechanical issues affected the car during the race. Fernando just seems to not be able to get away from mechanical issues during his career, it sadly seems. Returned to race in the 24 Hours of Daytona in 2019 with Wayne Taylor Racing. He shared a Cadillac DPI VR with former Formula One driver Yumi Kobayashi and Andrew Van der Zand and Jordan Taylor. The team completed 593 laps to win with a rain-shortened event. So that was a win for him in endurance. McLaren's Zach Brown actually talked about an entry for him in the 2018 24 Hours of Le Mans. They were prepared for him to switch with another team if certain terms were met. Alonso and Toyota kept having talks and decided that it was going to happen, that he would compete in the 24 Hours of Le Mans after he visited their factory for a seat fitting in 2017. Alonso entered into a post-season rookie test at the Bahrain circuit following his seat fit with them. And in 2018, there was an agreement reached that allowed him to enter the full 2018-2019 FIA World Endurance Championships, where he was teamed with former Toro Rosso driver Sebastian Buemi and former Williams driver Kazuka Nakajima in Toyota's number 8 hybrid for the Le Mans Prototype 1 class.
So the 2018-19 World Endurance Championship calendar is kind of unique in that it was split between 2 years. So it was the first year to run a winter schedule through 2 calendar years that started in late spring 2018 and ended in the summer of 2019. It included 2 runnings of the Le Mans race, of the 24 hours of the Le Mans race. This weird schedule means that 5 out of the 8 races taking place that season happened during the 2018 F1 season, which Alonso was still competing in at the time. This is impressive because, like, the driving style and the culture of the 2 sports couldn't be more different. So unlike F1, where, your teammate is your greatest rival and, fast, quick, everything is very fast-paced. The World Endurance Championship is very different, as you have to rely on your teammates because you physically can't drive for 24 hours straight, so you need to switch drivers to be able to complete the race. So you need to share data. You need to work with them. And it's also much more long-term thinking because the car has to last for 24 hours as well. So it's not like go as fast as you can and you're done. You have to kind of think more about the future of the race as well. So having to switch back and forth, throughout that entire season between F1 and then endurance and then back to F1 and back again multiple times is crazy to have to switch between that mindset so many times. And F1 was already, a physically demanding sport. And so just basically competing in an entire other series at the same time, is super impressive, let alone when he was 37, which is Lewis Hamilton's age right now. So could you imagine Lewis Hamilton doing that currently? That would be crazy. And Alonso actually won his first ever entry into Le Mans in 2018, which got him just that one step closer to the Triple Crown, which means all that's left is the Indy 500. The team actually finished the season with 5 victories out of the 8 races, so they did very well. And they also won the second running of Le Mans in 2019 for that season and ended up winning the World Endurance Championship. So he is now a champion in 2 different disciplines.
Oh, Fernando's 2019 Le Mans win is a little interesting because it is partly due to the fact that their teammates in the other car of Mike Conway, Kayumi Kobayashi, and Jose Maria Lopez suffered sensor issues while leading the 2019 6 Hours of Spa and then suffered a puncture while they were comfortably leading the 2019 24 Hours of Le Mans with an hour remaining in the race, which is just a blow to the ego if you're going to have an issue that close to the end of a race.
Now, Fernando obviously enjoyed his time away from F1, winning new championship, winning Le Mans, one of the most prestigious races in motorsports, twice. But the allure of F1, was always there. And so in 2020, he announces that he will be returning to F1 with the same team that he won his championships with, Renault. And it's actually there's a picture where back when he first joined the team, they had him, like, take a picture in front of the factory like it's your first day of school. I'm sure a lot of people's parents, first day of kindergarten, you have the picture, and then for senior year, you recreate it. And that's exactly what Fernando did, is he recreates that same picture by standing in front of the now modernized 2020 Renault factory building. But it's just funny that, even F1 drivers take those school picture-esque things when coming back. And he actually came back to the F1 track, literally, with a roar, as he drove his 2005 championship-winning Renault around the Abu Dhabi track in between the practice sessions. And he even wore his old race suit. Fun fact about that car is that the team actually gave it to Fernando as like a gift after he won his first world championship, and he just kind of had it in his garage. And so many people wanted to come see it that's actually why he opened his museum and racetrack, is to house at first that car and now like a bunch of other cars that he's driven. But just a fun fact about that car. And there's tons of videos online where you can hear that car going around the track, and since it had a V8, the scream kind of noise that comes with it is unmistakable. And there was an interview that Lewis Hamilton was doing at the time where you hear the car going in the background and he just like whips his head around and he's like, oh, I love that sound. Like, everyone loves that sound. And in the documentary series, they show a current Haas mechanic that was a mechanic on the Renault team back in the day, actually like honestly fangirling over the whole car. And he's like, oh, I can't believe it. Like, he was so excited to see this car. And, every single team is lining the track with phones, recording everything. So that was kind of a cool way to come back to F1 in a very, unmistakable car. But to get him back to used to modern F1 cars, they actually managed to convince the FIA and the other teams to let him drive in their young driver test session during the postseason at Abu Dhabi. And it's typically meant for like rookies, people that, are a bit inexperienced with F1 to kind of get a chance to try out the car. But Alonso is definitely, I would say, fairly experienced, having had many seasons in the sport. So this is kind of where the Alonso is the, best rookie jokes kind of began, as he was running around the track with a bunch of poor, innocent rookies. But apparently Fernando just can't quite catch a break, because, right before he gets back into the F1 car for his comeback, he gets hit by a car while he's biking. Like, you can't make this up. Like, his luck is horrible. And it was a pretty bad hit, because he fractured his jaw, and it actually required metal plates to be like surgically implanted. And he actually raced with that in his head like the whole season, which I don't know how that would have felt. That's crazy. I believe he's had them taken out now, but just managing to race and do, anything with that is crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, as Casey and Amy covered, he took a 2-year break from F1, but then just couldn't stay away, I guess, and rejoined Renault, now known as Alpine. And while it took him an actual few races to like get up to speed, even though he was considered the most experienced rookie, he really was able to already score his first podium at Imola after Raikkonen received a post-race penalty. And Imola, as we know from this season, is early on in the season. And Hungary, a few races later, saw even more improvements. He led the race for a good bit, and his teammate Esteban Ocon even said that Alonso was the reason why he, Esteban, could get his maiden F1 victory due to his excellent defense against Hamilton. And the summer break, like I feel like for Fernando Alonso, he ages like fine wine. Like, every single season, every single overtime, he just gets better and better. And 2021 was no different, because after summer break, he came back even stronger. And this culminated in him getting his first podium finish since Hungary 2014, and that podium he got in Qatar. For 2022, he opted to extend his contract with Alpine before ultimately moving to Aston Martin for 2023 due to Vettel's retirement, which Chelsea will talk more about.
To say Alonso joining Aston Martin was a surprise would be an understatement. With Sebastian Vettel retiring from Formula One and in turn leaving the Aston Martin team in 2022, Alonso saw his opportunity to join the AM team alongside Lance Stroll for the 2023 season. Now, the statement was released only 24 hours after the Alpine principal himself had shared that he was sure Alonso would be staying. But, as Alonso was quoted saying, "No one in Formula One today is demonstrating a greater vision and absolute commitment to winning, and that makes it a really exciting opportunity for me." Now, after following what the Strolls were creating at AM for the past couple years, Alonso decided he wanted in. Plus, he's actually known the Strolls for a while now, and he admits you can tell how passionate the duo are for Formula One. Since the 2023 season has started, we've seen Alonso win podiums in 5 out of 7 races, with the Spanish Grand Prix recently being his lowest standing this season at 7th place. And the crowds are really just itching for Alonso's 33rd place, first place podium. And Alonso thinks he can do it. He says Aston has what it takes to help him get world championship one last time before retiring, again, in maybe a few years, but maybe not this season with how Red Bull's car is on the circuit. Now, honestly, I do hope we get to see Alonso win one more world championship. And honestly, with how Aston Martin is looking this year, I don't see it that far off from his future.
Okay, and before we wrap up, I wanted to drop a little fun fact because I went down a massive rabbit hole of Fernando Alonso because he is the man, the myth, the legend. When F1 allowed drivers to start selecting car numbers for their cars throughout their careers, which was in 2014, Fernando Alonso immediately requested number 14 because it had been his lucky number since his World Karting Championship victory in kart number 14 at the age of 14 on the 14th of July in 1996. We love a man who likes his numbers and is consistent.
And so this week for our driver's quote, Alonso has many, but the one we choose is, if you've seen Drive to Survive, you know it. Bye-bye. I am still the bad guy.
I love seeing a spicy Fernando through the years. Don't you? What are some of your favorite Fernando moments? Let us know on our socials at Paddock Girls Podcast everywhere except Twitter. There you can reach out to Paddock Girls Pod. Thank you so much for joining us in the paddock today. We are looking forward to some fun episodes this week before the teams travel to Canada. Also, should we place bets on how many times Lando pops up on Twitch this week? I'm thinking at least 3 times out of his boredom, but we'll see. Thanks again for joining us in the paddock today. See you next time. Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
See you, Craig.
Bye, Craig.
Bye, Craig. Bye, Craig.